So do vaccines really work? Freaking runny diarrhea bullcrap, yes they do. I don't know why we are still having this conversation in the modern world. Well, I guess I do know why. I'm Dr. Nathan, and you're listening to Vet Talk, the Veterinary Podcast. Like us and subscribe, and join the Patreon for early content, scripts, and more conversations. So let's start breaking down the issues I see leading us to still talking about if vaccines really work. First, we have had some form of vaccines for a long time and have used them to good effect. They started out basic, where small amounts of virus were put in the patient, and have since only increased in their complexity. 1796 is when Edward Jenner used the cowpox virus to make the first vaccine, which was for smallpox. The vaccine I talk about the most was first made in 1885 by Louis Pasteur for rabies. Vaccines aren't new. Vaccines, as we think about them as Edward Jenner made, have been around for about 224 years. They have had almost as much time to develop, more if you count the times we just shoved small amounts of raw virus into people, as our country. Why are vaccines so important? It's the fact that vaccines are our human response to fighting disease. Smallpox, a virus, itself has influenced history, being noted as far back as the Egyptians, with Ramses V likely dying of the disease in 1158 BC. So this virus has been around. Fast forward to 1777. Our greatest founder, George Washington, thought vaccination, or the closest thing they had at the time, being variolated, was very important. He had a war to fight, and because of the disease that was going through his camps, he didn't have the troops to fight that war. He ordered the entire Continental Army variolated. Moving forward, during the Civil War, there are over 600,000 Union and Confederate soldiers. 29,000 developed smallpox, and 10,000 died of the disease. This disease killed nearly 300 million people in the 20th century alone. Imagine if the U.S. was isolated and in 100 years 300 million people died. That's roughly 85% of our current population. Yet now, because of vaccines, this disease has been eradicated. In the U.S., before vaccines for polio were introduced in 1955, about 33,000 people a year were infected with polio. If you didn't die, you could be paralyzed. But after vaccination began, cases dropped to around 6,000 cases. From a book I highly recommend reading, Viruses, Plagues, and History Past, Present, and Future by Michael Oldstone, the author makes the statement that when culture and science clash, culture always wins. He uses the example of the polio vaccine in a Muslim nation where Muslims were suspicious of the vaccine. They were concerned about political enemies spreading diseases through the vaccine, which was fake news, but they're also concerned about sterility issues, and that's justifiable to talk about. But the sterility issue concern occurred in one instance of a contamination of the vaccine. Side effects and human errors which can be talked about, but this vaccine for polio has stopped a disease from killing millions of people once we started vaccinating. Does anyone listening to this, especially those in the United States, know anyone infected with polio? Vaccines work. Polio and smallpox are great examples. One of the issues is vaccines do what they are supposed to do, and not everyone knows what vaccines actually claim to do. Have any of you read the vaccine label? Vaccines will stimulate an immune response in the body. They're either going to totally prevent or lessen the signs of a disease for a certain amount of time. This allows you to have protection at varying levels from disease without having to be exposed to the actual disease. Now, there are lots of modifiers to this and lots of ways that we can accomplish getting this protection. And while all that is really cool, all the ways we can vaccinate or provide immune protection for people and animals, that's not exactly the scope of this episode today. It works. I spent years studying vaccines and immunology to know that it does, and I hope the small history I just give shows how we have been vaccinating for a long time and improving our methods of vaccination. Also, the FDA, which regulates vaccines, is very stringent. I complain a lot about drugs and vaccines that I hear about and that other countries have access to that we don't have access to in this country. There are reasons we don't have access to those drugs, because the FDA wants to make sure the drugs and vaccines we get are safe. The FDA is strict with what they approve to be safe in people and in animals in this country. Americans demand such safety, and even though it frustrates me, I do think it's best. I'd rather have drugs that are safe and be slow to get new drugs than deal with bad side effects. As a doctor, at least. As a patient that is suffering, I can understand why we might want the FDA to be less stringent if there is a chance of relieving suffering. But for me, when I administer products in America, I know it has met safety standards and been thoroughly tested. Listen to my Life Science episode to hear discussion on what drug companies have to do to meet FDA standards, even with drugs that are just being repackaged. If with the evolution of history we have seen the good effect of vaccines and how much safer they are now than years before, and the most stringent tests in the world show that the vaccines are safe and effective, why are we having this conversation about whether vaccines are safe and effective? Well, first, I think this applies to a lot of problems right now. Americans have been spoiled. We have been at the top of the world in a lot of ways for a long time now. I'm not saying we don't have our problems. We have homeless, even though most of us live like kings compared to most people in history. We have rich people and we have poor people. We have lived in a stable democratic system for a long time. Long enough that we take for granted the system, believing some things that happen elsewhere cannot happen here, even if they can and maybe are happening here. Watching clients talk and seeing what they drive, it seems most clients think they are poor if they don't have the latest car and a 60-inch flat-screen TV. My wife and I sometimes talk how we know how we have a roof over our head, food on the table, and our health. So even if we didn't get to go on that fancy vacation, we're still leading good lives. And this transfers over to vaccinations as well. COVID was a new disease, and we had a vaccine in about a year. I mean, that's damn quick. How lucky are we to live in a modern world where in an emergency we can get vaccines developed so quickly? But we also have lived in a world where, because we have such good vaccines, how many diseases do we actually see? And do people start thinking we don't need vaccines because the vaccines have done such a good job at keeping disease down? There's around 350 million people in America today. We haven't seen wild cases of polio since 1979. Only an imported case of polio was described in 1993. We don't have smallpox. In the U.S., before the tetanus vaccine, around 500 cases were reported a year, and that's down to 30 now with the vaccine. Worldwide, before tetanus vaccine was made, 1 million people a year died. Now, worldwide, it's only 34,000 people that die. Jumping back to smallpox, the last known case of smallpox was in Somalia in 1977. The World Health Organization declared it eradicated in 1980, and the last naturally occurring case in the United States was 1949. There are diseases we don't vaccinate for because the disease was eliminated. How awesome is that? There are other diseases we vaccinate for only once or twice in our lifetimes, like tetanus, and we don't see the diseases because the vaccine lasts for so long and is so protective because of the immune response it generates from our bodies. But we also have diseases we have to vaccinate for more often because of the nature of the disease, like respiratory viruses. These are viruses that mutate easily, and our vaccines may not be as effective because the viruses change so much, or because we haven't figured out how to make the immune system give such a long-lasting response as with other vaccines. So, These vaccines that don't respond well or have viruses that mutate quickly are things you hear about, such as COVID and flu. Other diseases, we are lucky because we can give vaccines which last longer, such as diseases like rabies. I received an initial rabies vaccine in 2002. I checked my titers in 2004 and I was well protected. And then again in 2010, still being protected. I should probably check that again, but one round of vaccine has given me years of protection. In humans, they recommend an annual flu shot. The flu doesn't have the same protection length as the rabies. They recommend the annual flu shot for the duration, as well as the fact as the flu virus can mutate so quickly and we have different strains of flu attack us each year. Let me jump over to some equine respiratory viruses and vaccines, because that's what I understand even better. In horses, I recommend vaccinating for equine herpes virus 1 and 4, as well as flu once a year. But I give people the caveat that you may need to booster this vaccine in 6 months. The respiratory vaccines don't last as long in horses. They may only last 4 to 6 months. Now, I tell my clients, you are probably good with just one vaccine. I only vaccinate my horses once a year for these viruses. But that's because I know my clients and my horses. The immunity may wane, but my clients are not taking their horses out 6 months later in winter. Because let's say you vaccinate your horse in April. It gives protection for 6 months. That gets you through October. By then, most horse people are not taking their horses out to be exposed. So it doesn't matter if you have vaccinated them or not. So those clients don't get a fall booster, and they just wait to get their next booster the following spring when they start to travel again and are exposed to other horses and potential disease. For my clients that do extensive showing and traveling in the fall, I recommend a booster vaccine for them. To me, vaccines are like insurance. You don't need it until you do. If you never have exposure, you don't have an issue. But if you do, one of two things will happen. 1, you don't know you were exposed because the vaccine protects you. 2, the disease is not as bad as it could have been because the vaccine protected you. This is where clients get confused. They want to think of the vaccine like the rabies vaccine in people. One inoculation may last your whole life. But not all vaccines are that good, so we need to booster them. Take the flu shot and the COVID shots out of the equation. All those shots we got as kids, we aren't boostering them later in life. Why isn't it the same in animals? I have so many clients not realize most vaccines in animals are meant to be given annually. They think it's one and done. So one thing I think we must really get people to realize is that immunity only lasts so long. Having to repeat a vaccine doesn't mean that this vaccine is not working. Vaccines do what they're supposed to do. But vaccines can't adapt as quickly as the viruses adapt, or we haven't figured out how to give our bodies such good length of protection with some vaccines versus others. A lot of people hear they were vaccinated once and it's all done, and that's just not the case. So here we have two factors at work. One, for example, the nastiest disease like smallpox, we have effective vaccines for, so we don't see that disease. 2, the diseases we see the most, even if the vaccine works by decreasing the clinical signs, changes so frequently that our vaccine makers have trouble keeping up, or our body has trouble keeping up. So maybe people are thinking the vaccines don't work because they still see the diseases that we vaccinate for the most. This may give people the idea vaccines don't work, which is false, but understandable why people come to that conclusion. Where in reality we vaccinate more for those diseases, not because the vaccines aren't working, but because we need that many vaccinations to prevent the disease. Again, remember how far we have come in the 224 years from where we did not have vaccines to having some that can give excellent immunity and others that may need to be boosted or just need a little help to give good immunity. We aren't perfect yet, and neither are our vaccines. And each vaccine is unique, and that's a lot to take in and understand. That understanding is a problem I see with my clients and their pets. They come in for one round of vaccines. In general, with puppy vaccines, I want to get 3 rounds on board. Clients frequently come back years after that 1 round of vaccine they got, saying their puppy is up to date on vaccines. It's not. It didn't get full immunity from 1 vaccine. And if it got its 3 vaccines, that immunity only lasts for so long. So maybe I can educate them about that, or maybe they think, well, I vaccinated this dog once and it still got the disease. So they begin not to trust the vaccinations because they don't realize what the vaccine was actually saying it would do. So it's just a lack of understanding all the different ways vaccines can work. And here we get into education levels. In 2022, 79% of U.S. adults were literate. Okay, not bad, I guess. But if you look at it more, 54% of adults have a literacy level below the 6th grade level, and about 20% read below a 3rd grade level. I wasn't sure what level I was at, so I tested myself online, and it said I was a B2 upper intermediate level of reading. That says I'm at the 7th to 8th grade level. I was just 1 off the highest level of reading on this website, which was for 9th through 12th graders. I'd need someone who understands the system better to explain to me all the ins and outs of what this means. So if we have any teachers out there who want to come on the show and explain this to me, let me know. I'd be curious how smart I actually am. But my question is, what does this mean for how well we can comprehend the world around us? Because vaccines and vaccine schedules are complex. I edited this script a few times trying to come to a concise conclusion of what I explained above, or what I just explained to you about vaccines, and I'm not sure it was the best way to get to that point. So it's hard for me, and I've studied this stuff and explained it to people for years. These vaccines, they affect bacteria and viruses that are unseen to the naked eye to prevent diseases that haven't happened yet. To give vaccines seems like solid preventative planning, but I'll use myself for an example. The dentist recommended I return to see him to prevent a problem that has not yet occurred. Yeah, I still haven't been back. People are worried about their own lives, so I don't blame them for not studying immunology in their free time. But it becomes even harder to plan accordingly and get ahead in life without a solid education in your background to help you do that planning. Education helps you understand and think critically about why the unseen things are important and why it's valuable for you to treat them as important. When you value something as important, you will make time in your life to make it a priority. Or you will know to listen to an expert to make their recommendations a priority. For example, I know a lot about veterinary medicine, and if you listen to my podcast frequently, I also think I know a lot about other subjects as well. You can decide about the second part yourself. But when I wanted a new roof put on my clinic, I called a roofing company and trusted them to do the job. Did I know how to put on a roof? Yes, I have helped my dad put a few roofs on buildings. But it would take my extreme effort to put a roof on my clinic, so I called someone with up-to-date tools, staff, and standards. They had my new roof on in a day, and I had enough knowledge to know that they did a good job. Could I have done it? Yes. Would it have been as quick and as good as the professionals? No. That's why you come to me for vaccine recommendations for your pet, and your doctor for vaccine recommendations for yourself and your children. Yeah, you could probably muddle through which vaccines to give yourself, but as doctors, we have training and expertise individually and as a collective on what to recommend and give, which companies have quality products, which type of vaccines work well, and what diseases may be local to your area. Like myself and the roof, I didn't have time to figure all that out, so I hired a professional. You hire me to recommend vaccines for your animals. Which leads us to one of the other problems I see, culture. Sure, there are professionals, but do we trust them? For example, I used a roofer to put a new roof on my house, and they did so bad that even my basic roofing skills could tell it was very bad. We fired them, and Dad and I came back and redid the roof ourselves correctly. So not every professional knows what they are talking about. So obviously we have to turn to someone else. So who do we turn to? The media? Our friends? Our neighbors? Someone goes on TV and starts spouting off stuff they may believe, but they don't really know what they're talking about. And suddenly, people believe them because they feel trustworthy. My roofer for my house felt trustworthy. With the results, I saw he didn't know what he was talking about. The roofer for my clinic felt trustworthy, and with the results, I realized they did know what they were talking about. So sometimes you get professionals like that roofer at my clinic. They knew what they were talking about. Or maybe, like the roofer at my house, they left holes in the roof. So you have to figure out how to critically think and realize who is going to be a reliable professional. So people that don't trust vaccines may have arguments because of situations like that haven't worked. Maybe it's because of culture telling them it won't work. Or maybe it's because their neighbors didn't have the education to understand that they needed a few vaccines to have the protection needed for that disease. Or sometimes it's just emotional. Maybe people think that the vaccines will kill them. Maybe they think it will put robots in their blood. Maybe they think they don't work. These are all things I have heard from clients. These are all things that have caused people to walk out of my vet hospital and not come back. If they don't come back, then what other medical problems will be missed if they're not getting an exam on their pet? What medical problems are missed by your doctor if you're not going because you don't trust that they recommend vaccines? Doctors have to get you through the door to find some of the issues that might be going on. I already have problems getting people to vaccinate their animals. I have noticed more pushback from people not wanting to vaccinate their animals. In my area, another thing that could be working against me is religion. I practice in an area where a lot of people believe in creationism, which is great. I believe in the Word of God and think it's true. Albeit, I think I'm not smart enough to understand and interpret all the time what he's saying. But keep following along this line of thought. Creationists, by their culture, have been trained that certain keywords like evolution are bad. They don't believe in evolution, so they shut down or get combative when someone starts talking about evolution. Which is hard for me because I'm over here saying things like parasites, viruses, and bacteria evolve. I've seen it. I've seen where my drugs work on a patient and then they don't. But sometimes when I say something has evolved, I have watched the client's face shut down. It goes from interested and listening to blank. Because I am confronting their religion. And I'm not trying to put down their religion, but I'm going to tell them what's going on with their pets and why I am recommending treatment protocols. But put all this together. Busy lives, religion, and education levels, followed by pop culture, all telling people that vaccinating is not necessary. How will that affect us? Let me give you 2 examples with pets. Worldwide, there are 60,000 people that die each year from rabies. In the U.S., there's less than 10 people a year that die from this disease. Rabies is here. It's in wildlife, and it won't go away because it's in the bat populations. So why do 20,000 people die in India? Why aren't we in the U.S. getting it like the rest of the world? Because we vaccinate. We vaccinate wildlife populations. We vaccinate pets. And then if humans are exposed, we vaccinate them. I have been vaccinated for rabies, since I am more likely to be exposed to animals which might have it. How many people have you heard of being vaccinated for rabies? Not many. Because we have such a good vaccination protocols in animals that we don't need to vaccinate a lot in people. But if everyone stops vaccinating, then rabies is more likely to make a comeback, first in animals, then in people. And people don't survive from rabies. Well, neither do animals. We need to vaccinate pets so it's a step further away from people. In my region, people aren't vaccinating due to the education level, like we've talked about before, and sometimes religion, as we discussed. But finances also play a role. A lot of people tell me they just don't have the money, and I believe them. I've talked more about the finances of people in Kentucky counties, and if you want to hear more about that, listen to my episode, To Vet School or Not. But the summary is only 8% of Kentucky counties has household incomes that have disposable income for pets. In my clinic, there are 1,857 pets who are not up to date on their rabies vaccinations. That's about 20% of my patients. I bet other clinics have less compliance than I do because I'm very strict with rabies vaccinations. I know that financing is one of the reasons that some people are not getting vaccinations. But let's move on past finances a bit. I had a dog come in just the other day. It had an expired rabies vaccine. It had just been picked up by animal control, the government, that day. The government didn't check or enforce rabies laws. So locally, the government doesn't care. A little bit later in the podcast, I'm going to talk about how nationally I'm worried it won't care. So adding all these things together, how long before we are seeing 20,000 cases of rabies in the U.S.? Maybe you'll be lucky. 20,000 is still low compared to the 330 million people that live here. But I don't think I want to take those chances. Let's move to another disease, parvo. I saw 18 parvo cases last year. That is a deadly viral disease in dogs, and the vaccine can prevent or reduce the chance of death. I also know there are more parvo cases because we have a lot of phone calls with people who have dogs with the signs of parvo, yet have no money to even afford the exam to diagnose the parvo, much less for the treatment of parvo. If vaccine compliance goes down because of all the factors I've been talking about, the disease will become more rampant, and we'll get more phone calls like that, where people don't have the money to come in to treat the disease. Vaccinations are important, safe, and we need them. I hope this discussion has proven that. But are they perfect? No. As with life, there are risks, and it is up to you and your doctor or veterinarian to weigh the risk of vaccinating. However, sometimes the government mandates it, like with rabies, for the safety of the entire community. And do all these laws and do all these vaccines and when to give them warrant discussions to make sure they are used properly and their safety is continued? Yes. There are discussions we can have about vaccines. The duration of protection and level of protection is something I talk about with clients. Not all vaccines can provide the same immune level of protection, nor for the same length of time. As we've discussed, the rabies vaccine is really good. In Kentucky, for animals, we give an initial vaccine and then booster it a year later, and then every 3 years after that. As I discussed above, I myself have received one rabies vaccination, and although I need to get my titers checked, the last time I did, it was still protective years after administration. Are all vaccines side effect free? No. First, you have response from vaccines. A response is when that patient's body is responding to the vaccine and can vary from mild to severe. That's a good thing. It means the vaccine's working and the body's reacting to it. But there are potential side effects that can be dangerous with vaccines. That's why we have such stringent government protocols to make sure the side effects are minimal. Plus, you have doctors who, before giving a vaccine, probably have looked at it and studied over it, giving you another more personalized safety net for taking this vaccine. Will there be bad reactions and side effects? Yes. But if we can keep these minimal, it gives us all greater safety when we get herd immunity. That has been demonstrated before. I mean, part of the win of the Revolutionary War was because of getting this herd immunity and having people that can fight instead of laid down sick in bed. So, yes, vaccines are safe and beneficial, but not without risk, that you should talk with your vet or with your doctor before getting a vaccine if you have any concerns. So why are we still having this discussion, and why am I bringing it up now specifically? because we have one more nail in the coffin for the anti-vaccination movement to grow. This episode aired earlier on my Patreon, before I know the outcome of what happens with some of the outrageous cabinet appointments I'm seeing. So I apologize if it's behind the times, but frankly, it's hard to keep track of the chaos going on in Washington. So if you want more timely episodes, join us or follow so you can purchase individual episodes early. But when I'm writing this, Trump's cabinet picks are showing how disastrous his mind is for the country. And it disturbs me how much the world is going to get set back during this time with Trump. So what's got me up in arms? It's his pick for RFK being in charge of Health and Human Services. Now, I don't know what will happen or if this will actually come to pass. RFK still needs Senate confirmations, but I just don't know why he wouldn't get it. For 8 years, I haven't seen the Republicans in the legislative branch stand against Trump, and now that the Republicans have a majority, I don't know why they would start standing against him. I feel like they will appoint RFK or he'll get appointed in a recess appointment. And I guess we are just getting what Trump voters wanted and voted for. In the script, I have some links to more discussions about this, but I wanted to focus on what was bothering me. What I am concerned about. Well, RFK doesn't believe vaccines work or are safe. He's part of that pop culture that is telling people vaccines are not safe or effective, which is a lie. They do what they claim to do. Most people just don't understand or take the time to understand the claims. Another thing, finances affect people's ability to vaccinate, and here come tariffs. Many syringe and needles are made in China. We use those to administer vaccines, which means vaccine prices are going to go up. This will make it harder for cash-strapped people to vaccinate. Local government isn't enforcing rabies laws. Friends and neighbors may not have had the time to educate themselves to push vaccination. Now the government, which is supposed to work for the people and based on facts, wants to put a vaccine denier in charge of the health of the United States. If the institutions historically pushing vaccinations start saying it's not worthwhile, how many people are going to use that as an excuse not to vaccinate? This could be disastrous for public health at so many levels. And even if RFK Jr. doesn't get this position, this shows the reign of Trump's administration's values towards public health. Public and personal health don't seem to be a priority. So if they have to pick someone else other than RFK Jr., will they really pick someone who is going to act more appropriately? Probably not. So what are we going to do about this? There's a few things. Write to your congressman and tell them how you value your health care and do not want people who deny science making decisions about how health care is run in this country. I'm going to send this episode to my congressman. I can't say I have high hopes of my message or this episode being listened to by my congressman. I'm from Kentucky, and policy-wise, my congressmen don't typically see eye to eye with me. But to me, this isn't policy. The next few years, and who we put in charge of various departments, is about defending and protecting the institution. The institutions we as Americans have grown and cultivated for years to make our country better. Do these institutions need to be constantly changed with a constantly changing America? Yes. But in charge of American departments should be someone who is a critical thinker and loyal to America versus loyal to an individual person. I hope my congressmen listen to my suggestions and listen to this podcast. I'd be glad of it. I'm not sure they will. And then that makes me very frustrated if my voice doesn't have value. But then I'm also frustrated because I'm not sure how well my voice does affect the world and how my actions can affect the world. And I feel like a lot of other people are feeling that way too, especially if we don't seem like we're making an impact on the leaders that we have at the moment. So what individual actions can we take? I mean, I think in general we are relying too much on our leaders, and Our leaders have definitely not figured out how to depolarize the country. So maybe we have to stand up and do it ourselves. If you feel educated enough to make informed decisions, and rely on experts when you aren't educated enough, then run for an office. So when decisions are made, they are fair and educated. It's time for people to be the change this country needs, or the resistance this country needs. Our leaders have proven they don't seem to have the stomach to be the change that this country needs. If you are listening, my Kentucky senators, only the proper amount of offense is intended. But here's the biggest thing we can do, is start thinking critically. Listen to professionals and take their knowledge. Be careful about listening to our well-intentioned friends or media stars who are just too far removed from normal life or too gullible to interpret all the information that gets put in front of them. We're all human and may be well-intentioned, but that doesn't always make us right. I know I've made my fair share of mistakes, but from each one I learn and try to get better. I do know there is danger in putting skeptics in charge of what they are skeptical about. I call my roofers for my roof projects. I call my dentist for my teeth problems. I need my clients to start trusting me for running my clinic and how to handle animal medical problems. And I need my clients to become critical thinkers so they can use professionals appropriately to question and to come to valid conclusions, seeing through the fake news to keep America, its people, and its animals safe and healthy. I'm Dr. Nathan. Thanks for listening. I hope our discussions are valuable to you and aid in giving perspective. If you want to contact us, please reach out to theveterinarypodcast@gmail.com. You can find a complete list of the podcast episodes on SoundCloud. If you find this information helpful and want more content, please join our Patreon, patreon.com/theveterinarypodcast. And don't forget to follow our Facebook page, facebook.com/theveterinarypodcast. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope this information is helpful to you. If you do find it helpful, please like it, share it, so other people may find it helpful as well.